Hey everyone, NDC here, and today we're going to be taking a look at giving users a little bit more control in our apps. We're going to be taking a look at toggles for having things, on or off. We're going to be taking a look at steppers, which are a really great way to increase or decrease the value, even if you're, adding a certain amount of things to the cart, as well as the slider, which gives a little bit more of a fine-tuned control within a range. So think of the volume slider that you may have in some apps. This is perfect for any setting screens, forms, or really just giving people the ability to have these different value pickers. So if you're interested in learning on how to implement these into your app as well as some basic customization, let's go ahead and dive on in. Alrighty, let's first start off by talking about toggles. Toggles are always tied to a Boolean value. So I'm going to go ahead and start off by creating a state private var here. And we're going to create a Boolean value, and we can say sound enabled. Right, so maybe in your app, you can have this control whether the sound is enabled or disabled. So in this case, we're going to set it to be false, which will be the default value. Create a toggle, we'll be using the toggle keyword. We can see here within the autofill, we have so many options. The most important one is the is on. So let's go ahead and just quickly add a string label. If you want to get a little bit more in depth with the label, you totally can. Let's just call this one enable sound. After the string, we'll add a comma, and then we'll do that is on, which is the big one for the toggle. So this is going to be a binding because we're going to be using this toggle to change the state of that Boolean value. So because we're using a binding, we're going to use our $sign, and we're going to reference our sound enabled state private variable or whatever you named yours. So we can see here that our enable sound has been added. Because it's default set to false, it's off on the screen, but we can turn it on or off. So now we can use that Boolean value to flag or track those different changes in our app. So this binding allows us to click this, the value then swaps to true. If we click it off, the value comes back down to false. So let's do a quick if statement. If statements are pretty easy to do with Booleans. So we'll say if sound enabled, what do we want to have happen? Well, let's have some text that appears that says sound is enabled. And let's also change the foreground style to be green. You can see here when we click on it, the sound is enabled. When it's off, the sound is disabled. So you will actually want to have that Boolean affecting some logic in your app, of course, to actually turn that sound on or off, or however you're using this. There is a few more different things we can do for customization. So we can actually change the toggle style. So the toggle style, from here we can use dot notation. We can see automatic button switch. So I am actually using the new Apple Glass, so I'm curious what the button looks like here. It's just going to be a button that we can press, and you can see by default, it kind of doesn't have this background at all. When we click on it, we see that our sound is enabled, but we also have this more floating kind of background color behind it, or I guess backdrop in that case. Not a huge fan of this one, to be honest, but you might find a use for it in your app. I personally love the switch with the toggle. This to me screams toggle in my head. We can also change the tint. So currently by default, whenever we have it activated, it's actually making that color green. If we were to change the tint to be orange, we can see that when it is enabled, the toggle is now that orange color. Otherwise, when it's off, it's that default gray look. If we wanted even more customization, let's say we want to add a label to our toggle instead of just passing through the text. We would just have our argument include the is on sound enabled. We would then add our brace, and from here we can add a label. Let's make this enable sound again. And because we're using a label, let's go ahead and pass through that system image. I believe it's speaker.fill, I could be wrong, which will have this little speaker. Maybe we can make it, I think it's speaker wave dot fill. Nope. Is it 2.fill? Yeah, there we go. You might want to use the SF library to find that a little bit nicer. You, of course, customize that toggle, so we're clicking on and off. So if you want a little bit more control of how your toggle looks, again, you can, of course, use the label, you could use the images, but make sure you're using this to be descriptive about what this toggle is changing when it's on or off. And this is what it looks like with the button. You can see that our tint, so since we've made it the tint of orange, it does kind of look like that orange has like a little bit of opacity drip behind it from when it was the default colors. So there you go. And you can customize these as much as you would like. Again, use that boolean value to make those changes elsewhere in your app between the true and false. All right, next up, we're going to be taking a look at the stepper. So again, I'd recommend having a state private variable because these are all things that when we interact with them, the value is going to be updating or changing. So let's have this one be count, and we'll set the initial value to be 0. From here, we can add our stepper. Again, we have a lot of options with the autofill, and we're going to make a really basic stepper. So we're going to include some text, and here we'll have the count. And I'd also recommend, you can display this text anywhere else, but just to track your changes, we can actually interpolate within the label of our stepper what that count is. After you've done that, you're going to add your comma, you're going to add the value that it's associated with, and we're going to use our binding of count. So we can see our steppers add to the screen, pretty basic. We can press this to go up 1, we can press this to go down by 1. And we can see that we can go all the way down to the negatives. We can click this as much as we want, it might even go into infinity, right? We want to have probably a little bit more control over how our stepper works, especially if you're adding things to a shopping cart. I'm not going to be adding -20 bananas to my shopping cart and you pay me. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So what we can do is we can create a range. So after the value, let's create a range. So we'll say in, and let's have this be, from 0 to 100. Let's say you can buy, 100 bananas. So now when we can go all the way up. And when we reach 0, because, negative numbers aren't within our range, we can't go down anymore. And this stepper gets grayed out. Same thing if we were to go all the way to 100. That's going to take me forever. I'm just going to change this to be 10. So now that we're at 10, it's grayed out. We can't go any higher. But what if we want to change the amount that it's incrementing or decrementing? Well, we can add another comma and we can add the step modifier. We can then say, okay, how many points of value is this going to change up or down? We make this 5. Every time we press this, it goes up by 5, and vice versa for when we go down. So this is a great way to, again, add things to a shopping cart, or maybe you're using this to control text size or amount of points that you're adding to, people's score in a game. So I'm going to change this back down to 1, and I'm going to change our default value to be 14. I'm going to show you why in a second. I'm going to be using this in another VStack here, and we're going to have some text. I'm going to call this one change me. And what we're going to do is for the font here, we're going to make this system. And for the size, we're going to be changing this size based off of the count. So we're going to say CG float. Then within the brackets, we're going to reference our count. So now when we're doing our change me, oh my goodness, it's growing and growing and growing, right? So you're able to use this value to augment or make those changes within your code. Again, if we change this step to be, like 5, every time we change it, it's going to get pretty large and in charge a lot quicker. You can customize your stepper the same way we've done with our toggle there. So if we wanted to have a little bit more control over our label, we totally could. So if we wanted to have the title and image here, so text changer, and then from here, let's grab that system image. Oh, here we go, text format.alt. Let's try that one. There we go, and we can have that label better kind of describe. So other than updating the label, there isn't a whole lot that we can do with the stepper, unfortunately. There's no real stepper style that we can add. The only other thing I want to mention with the stepper is we could do our label and things like that, and we can have the on increment and on decrement. So if you want to have certain logic whenever we press the plus button or the minus button respectively, you can have a little bit more control. Otherwise, this is basically how I'd be using those steppers. They're bare bones, but really powerful. Alrighty, let's now take a look at the slider. So I'm just going to make another value here, slider value, and let's have this be 0.5. We're going to be making this a double for now. You can use sliders however you want. If you want 0 to 100, of course, feel free to do so. I find it's pretty much good control to have from 0.0 to 0.1 with sliders, but that's totally subjective. So let's create a slider, and again, we can include a value of what this slider is linked to. We're going to use our binding of slider value. You can see our slider's been added. Again, I'm using the Apple Glass update, so we can actually kind of see into our slider. I really do like these new sliders as we change it. Right now, we're kind of just moving it, and the value's just moving around. We can't really see it though. There's a lot that we could do with sliders. Volume controls and things like that are like perfect for how sliders work. If we want to give our slider a range, because right now we can just assume it's going from 0 to 1.0, but if we want more finite control, we totally can. We can do in, and we'll have this be 0, 1.0. So now we definitely know that our slider is going through those different value ranges. Now the slider is great, and we have that value that goes from 0 to 1.0, but how do I know what the left represents? Like when I decrease it or when I go to the right, increase it represents. We probably want to make this a little bit more intuitive for the users. So after our range, we're going to add a comma, and we can add the minimum value label. Now you can add things like images. I'm going to keep it really simple, and add some text. So I'll say that this is low. We'll then add a comma, and we can add the maximum value label. Again, I'm going to go for text, but you can see how using things like SF symbols, so if you're doing this for volume, the little speaker that's empty, and then on the right side, the little speaker that's, with the waves that we saw in the previous example, you totally could, keeping it simple, high and low. Afterwards, you will need to add some braces, and within these braces, you can add any more stylings that you would like to include. Okay, and now let's actually have this slider control. Let's do the opacity of an image. So I'm just going to grab an SF symbol here. Let's add some, things. Let's make it resizable. That's always so funny. Let's add a frame here, and let's add the width and the height. Okay, not as crazy now. We'll then look at the opacity of this image, and let's go ahead and assign it to be based off of that slider value. So now we can see as we go down, it goes all the way down to 0, and then as we go up, it becomes more full. So we can use this to control the value of something, in this case, the opacity. Again, this can be used for volume, this can be used for changing the sizes of things. If you give people the option of control, you allow them to create their own experiences or select their own values. Now here we do have the slider in, etc., etc. What if we wanted to have this step? Well, we totally can as well. So in this case, it does make your slider feel a little bit janky in my opinion. So after the range, I'm going to add a step and another comma, and then I'm going to assign it a value. So in this case, 0.2, and you're thinking, well, what makes it janky? It kind of, as you're moving the slider, it kind of snaps, and it might be really hard to see, so I'm going to super zoom in. The nice thing is on some of the new sliders, depending on the iOS you're using, there are these little indicators. But it kind of has this snapping between the two indicators. But this is really great if you want to kind of limit or control the values the users are accessing. So in this case, we have the 0.2 snap. I can make this even more aggressive, and we'll do like 0.3, which doesn't quite totally work with the math here, but we'll get there. So you can use this stepper to really control those different points that the slider is accessing here. So just to quickly go over, we have the value, we have the range that we can adjust the slider in, we have the step, totally optional as well, of how we're kind of controlling what values the users can snap to. Otherwise, we can kind of just add some tint if we really want to change the color of it. Here we have an orange slider, but don't really get that much control over these built-in SwiftUI views, but they're still so valuable. One other little minor thing for the slider is the onEditingChanged. This is how you can track editing. So in this case, this is going to only perform the expensive update after the drag ends. So if we're moving the slider all the way until that drag ends where I release, then we're going to call upon the function. So in this case, maybe we're saving the brightness. So let's, you'd actually want to probably handle your logic a little bit better, but let's go ahead just for argument's sake to show you how it works. So save the data. So I'm going to drag it and I'm moving it around and moving it around, nothing's, saving. It would be updating. I'm going to let go. And as soon as I let go, it's going to then, call upon that function, or, if you're accessing save data, through Swift data, app storage, etc. It's not going to occur until the user lets go. So you can move it around as much as you want. As soon as it let go, well, in that case, I slid off the phone screen. In that case, letting go of it, it won't proc it until then. So you can use that editing to, allow those changes or saves to only happen in those moments when it's let go. So now you can confidently add toggles, steppers, and sliders into any SwiftUI app and customize them for a great user experience. I'll be putting a sample project with all the different UI elements we talked about today in the description below if you want to download it and take a closer look. Otherwise, dream big, code bigger, and we'll see you in the next one. Have a great day.